Hi, welcome everyone. I'm so excited that you're here to join me on this Saturday morning or afternoon. This is the first time I've actually done a Saturday webinar, and I was kind of curious to see, would this be a good day or would this be a day, that didn't work out so well, so I'm real excited to see you guys here. I'm Laura Candler, and I'm here to share with you how to teach kids to love poetry even if you don't. Now, I know some of you are here who love poetry, and that's awesome, and hopefully you'll pick up some great ideas too. But if you are someone who's been kind of uncomfortable about teaching poetry, I'm hoping that I'll be able to change your mind about it, and that when you leave the webinar, you will feel excited and inspired and confident to go out and go back to your classrooms and teach it. So let's move on and get started. Okay, as I said, I'm Laura Candler. I have a website, lauracandler.com. A lot of you are familiar with it, I'm quite sure. And I also have a blog that's more recent, corkboardconnections.com. The two kind of work together. My website is like where my file cabinet is and where my files are stored. And then my blog is more where I explain things. And then I also do have a Teachers Pay Teachers store that's not shown here. But so these are, you may be familiar with either or both of those. So I just did see a comment here, and I just wanted to mention, someone asked if there would be any notes or anything provided. I'm going to answer that in just a minute, actually, on this next slide, so kind of fits in with this. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to be doing a giveaway for my poetry bundle that includes 4 books, ebooks, and I'm also going to be putting a permanent link to this webinar recording in that bundle, as well as the webinar slides. Other than that, there are no slides or handouts or anything, so I guess you better grab a pencil and some paper and just take some notes as we go along here, because that's where everything is stored. Now, I'm going to be really upfront with you. Yes, I will be mentioning some of these books and products during the webinar. However, most everything that I'm going to be sharing with you is something that you can do on your own. So it's not meant to be just to, showcase these things. The webinar is going to be packed with content. That's the feedback I got from teachers who attended Wednesday, that they loved all the strategies and things that they could implement on their own. The other thing that's in the giveaway is I have an April activities pack with a color poetry lesson that I'll be showing you how you can do with your class, and that's included in the giveaway. So let's figure out if you are in the right place, because I value your time, and especially the fact that it's a Saturday morning or afternoon. So let's see if any of these sound like you, because if this is you, I really think this webinar is going to benefit you. The first one is, you feel like, I wish I didn't have to teach poetry, but I do. I feel absolutely lost. Help! If that's you, you need to just stick with me here, because you are going to feel so much better at the end of this hour. The next one is, I love teaching poetry, but there's not enough time in the day to plan amazing lessons. You'll get lots of great stuff too. And then the last one is, I just don't get poetry, and I never did. How can I teach it to my students? I know a lot of people feel like somehow like poetry is this mysterious thing that's beyond them, and they don't understand why anybody would even enjoy it. So then they don't feel like, they're just going through the motions when they're teaching it. So my goal is, at the end of this session, I want you to be so excited and inspired that you can't wait to get started teaching poetry. Now, I know that those of you who are uncomfortable with it are thinking, yeah, right, I just can't even imagine that day. But you will be surprised at how many of you actually are excited and inspired when you understand how easy it is. So here's what you're going to learn. First of all, why you should teach poetry, even if you don't like it. Step-by-step strategies for teaching kids to read, write, and understand poetry. how to get kids to dig deeper and enjoy talking about poetry. I've got several really good strategies that I think you'll be able to use them in other things besides poetry. And how to transform reluctant writers into enthusiastic poets. So this is what we're going to be covering, and then it's going to be very well outlined and detailed for you. The first thing is why you should teach poetry, even if you don't like it. There are a lot of aspects to this. One thing that I think is really important is how it, on kind of a personal level, how it can empower your students and how it can help your students. And what I want to do is share some things with you that I have not actually shared anywhere before this webinar. And it was kind of an interesting journey for me, sort of a journey back in time. And I really enjoyed preparing for this webinar, I guess, because of this. So what you're looking at here is some old journals of mine that I dug out from quite a while ago. Just for a little history on me, I was born in New Hampshire, and actually Manchester, New Hampshire, and I lived in New Hampshire for a number of years as a child and moved to some different places. But when I was in about 8th or 9th grade, my family moved to North Carolina. And if you've ever been in New England and then you've lived in the South, you know there's like two completely different cultures. Both of them have so many wonderful things about those cultures, but they're very different. So if you can imagine someone who's 14 or 15 years old, who's just kind of uprooted from New England and then, you know, kind of thrown into an environment in the South where, I mean, I literally could not even understand people's Southern accents. Now, I know I have a Southern accent by now. I have been here long enough for sure to have that, but when I first moved here, it was very frustrating. And poetry was kind of like the thing that really saved me. I started writing poetry to just kind of express my feelings, my emotions. You know, it was all about growing up, being in a new environment, finding friends, just so many things. And I also decided that I wanted to see if I could get some of my poems published, and I did. And on the left side, you see 3 books, and if you look at the dates, are 1974, so you can see how long ago that was. But these are actually 3 places that I had poems published when I was a teenager. And that was back in the day when you couldn't submit things online, because there wasn't any online or any concept of it. It was, you know, paper and pencil, mailing off things. And believe me, I mailed off a lot more submissions than just those 3. But it was really empowering to me as a teenager to see my work published and in print, and just the whole process of just being able to write down my feelings really helped me through that time. And it's kind of strange when I look back on these things, because I haven't written poetry in years and years, until actually when I was preparing the webinar, I wrote a few little poems, but overall I don't need it anymore. Like, it was a thing for me that helped me when I needed it, and then, you know, it's just kind of a part of my life. So it was really fun taking that journey back into time. You know, I was thinking the other day, you know, I ought to just like publish some of these poems, because I went back and some of them are pretty good. So that's my story. So let me show you how it kind of relates to my classroom and my students. One thing I found out about poetry with kids is when I taught them to write poetry, like free verse poetry, where it doesn't rhyme and it's just mostly expressing imagery or emotions or whatever, that the kids that did the best with it were the ones that normally struggled with writing. I think they just loved not having to worry about you know, spelling or grammar, and they could just really, you know, it's short, they didn't have to fill up the whole page. So this was a poem that was written by one of my students when I taught 4th or 5th grade, and I don't really remember which grade this was, and I looped one year, so he could have been in both. But I just think this is amazing for a 5th grader. The mane of the sun. As the sunshine lights up the earth, its beaming rays flash off the lion's mane of the sun, through the clouds rising, making the earth brighter, brighter, and brighter, as he makes morning with his beautiful mane. Like, that I'm telling you, like, this child did not get any help with any of the actual like imagery and everything. It wasn't just, you know, when the poem was done, there might have been some, you know, peer editing or whatever from me, I mean from his peers or from me, but it's just, to me, amazing. Like, this child had struggled just to write sentences and paragraphs. You know, you just, it's just one of those moments where you're like, I'm so glad I'm a teacher, because this is so special. You know, you just know that you have empowered a student when they can do this. Here's another example. Sorry. Kyra was another student, and I love this one too. She, you know, was very expressive. Same thing, where she had trouble writing sentences and paragraphs and even stories and things, but this just flowed for her. Me and you go together like I'm the key and you're the diary, and I open all your secrets. Me and you go together like socks. I'm the right and you're the left, walking together like friends. Me and you go together like best friends all the time. Like, I just, when I read that, you know, it was just one of those jaw-dropping moments where I'm kind of like thinking, okay, where did she copy this from? Like, this is so amazing. And I don't think she did, though. I mean, it was just when I talked to her about it and everything, it was just, we had been studying poetry, we had read a lot of free verse poetry, and so it was kind of like priming the pump, I guess you'd say. And then I took my kids outside one day and just like all this stuff just flowed. It was really amazing. Okay, let me make sure that I'm in the right place. So you might be thinking, well, I don't need to teach my kids to write poetry. You know, we have it on the test, and I need to make sure that they can read and understand poetry, but I don't really need to teach them to write it. But I'm going to hopefully change your mind. I'm not saying you have to devote 5 weeks to it or anything, but a day or two to allow the time for kids to write poetry. I really feel like kids who write poetry are way more able to read, understand, and appreciate poetry written by others. And so that definitely translates into higher reading performance on tests. If they've done it themselves, if they've had to create images, they get it, they appreciate it. But, you know, it's also very empowering as well. And like I said, we're just talking, give them a couple of days, and then the ones that really love it, you know, they'll continue on without you. Okay, so here's the poetry unit. I kind of mentioned in sharing about this webinar that I was going to outline for you a poetry unit step by step. And I will tell you, this is the only place that I've done this. I'm going to be mentioning some of my products as we go through this, but there is no product anywhere that tells you how to pull it all together. So this, I really put a lot of thought into this last week when I was putting the webinar together. I was kind of like going back through my mind, like, how did I do this for when I was teaching? Because I'm retired now. I didn't say that at the beginning, but I am retired now. I taught for about 30 years in 4th and 5th grade, and I've been retired for a couple of years, and I just love sharing strategies. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is to have your kids write a simple formula poem. Now I'm going to go into more detail with this, but I'm leaving it here while I'm just mentioning it in case you're wanting to jot down these steps. And then the next thing is to explore free verse poetry. Then compare and contrast like poetry and prose, because sometimes you assume your kids know what poetry is, but they really don't. And then learning the language of poetry is like, you know, those poetic devices like personification and onomatopoeia and everything. Then the 5th step is teaching them to like dig deeper into a poem's meaning, and then the last thing is like crafting or writing poetry together. So let me just go through these in more detail. If you were trying to write them, you'll see them at the top of the slides. And actually, here they are one more time slowly. So the formula poem, the free verse poetry, compare and contrast, learning the language of poetry, digging deeper and discussing poetry, and crafting poetry together and alone. So for the formula poem, I would suggest this simple one. It's a freebie. It's been, a lot of you may have already done it with your students because it's been free on my website for quite a while. It's a bio poem format, and when I say formula poem, it could be like Diamante, or like haiku is one, but haiku is very challenging to write. I wouldn't start with that. This is a really simple activity, and in this freebie, it tells exactly what to do, so I'm not going to go into great detail. So I'm sure you're wondering, like, where are the freebies? There's going to be a link provided at the end of the webinar where all of the freebies are on one page. So right now you can just stick with me, but just know that this is on that page. So if you've never done bio poems before, the way I've got this one set up, this is doing a poem about yourself. You could also later in the year do it about a historical figure or a scientist, or like, you can just do these things over and over. But the kids brainstorm things that go in these boxes, and then there's a planning page that they can kind of pick their best images. And then I've got a sample poem for you so you can see what a bio poem looks like. I really like using this formula poem rather than other ones because this one doesn't have any rhyming. If you do a formula poem like a limerick where there's like rhyming patterns, it just kind of perpetuates the idea that poems have to rhyme, and this one is clearly a poem, but it doesn't rhyme, so it's a really good one, and it's so easy to write. Another thing you might want to try is this Buddy Bio Poems lesson. This one is not free, but it's one that I created after the original freebie because last year sometime I thought, you know, it'd be really cool if you had two kids together and they interviewed each other and then they wrote bio poems about the other person, or a bio poem. So in this pack I have like a little sheets of paper, you know, use slips of paper where you can assign the buddies. You wouldn't want to let them pick. You should assign kids, and you should really assign kids that maybe don't even get along that well, because it'll help them get to know each other. And then there's some different writing forms. You can take pictures of the kids and put them in there. It makes a great wall display. So we're on to step 2 of the lesson format. The first one is just like a little teaser activity to get them started. So the next thing is free verse poetry. And here I've just kind of shown you a collection of some different things, and I'm going to dig into what it is, but these are two of my favorite children's poets or writers of children's poetry, Christine O'Connell George and Ralph Fletcher. And these poems, you'll see as we get into it why I like free verse poetry, but it kind of introduces kids to a lot of imagery, and it's easy for kids to relate to these poems. So let me look in here. Okay, so what is free verse poetry? If you're not familiar with this term, it's pretty simple. It's free verse. It's what it says. So generally there's no rhyme or rhythm. It doesn't follow any kind of pattern or formula, and a lot of times it captures a moment or conveys emotion in a few words. That's kind of the basic characteristics of it. I'm going to show you some examples in just a minute. And I do want to say that I'm not trying to diminish, you know, rhyming poems or poems like Shel Silverstein or Jack Prelutsky or different, you know, silly poems. Those are all fun kinds of poems, and kids often are exposed to those in kindergarten through 3rd grade especially. But at some point, I think it's really important to let them know that poetry doesn't have to rhyme, and that it can be for expressing emotion and all sorts of things. So this is kind of why my focus in this webinar is on free verse poetry. Not that the other is not good, but a lot of people teach the other and aren't really aware of how to teach free verse poetry. So here's some examples. This is your traditional type poem with rhyme and rhythm. This is from Robert Louis Stevenson. I actually picked this one because I have memories of my dad reading this to me as a child, and I loved it. It's a beautiful poem. So it's the swing. How do you like to go up in a swing, up in the air so blue? Oh, I do think it is the pleasantest thing ever a child can do. Up in the air and over the wall till I can see so wide, rivers and trees and cattle and all over the countryside, till I look down on the garden green, down on the roof so brown, Up in the air I go flying again, up in the air and down. So you hear that it has not only rhyme, but it also has a rhythm. It has sort of like a beat or a pattern to the sounds, and it's beautiful. But I'm telling you, if kids try to write this, when they try to write with rhyme and rhythm, the meaning is completely lost, and it sounds it does not sound like, they lose their voice as writers, basically, because they're so worried about making it rhyme. And they just will pick any old word. And I know you've seen this if you've had kids write rhyming poems. They'll just bring any old word in just because it rhymes. So it's sort of like you have to get them away from that. Now, I wanted to compare and contrast it with a free verse poem on the same topic. Well, rather than go trying to look and see if I could find one, like this one's in the public domain, so I shared it. But normally I wouldn't be able to share just any poem. So I thought, well, I'm going to try writing one. I wrote one. It took me like 1 minute, so you're going to have to forgive me. But this is an example of a free verse poem on the same topic. The swing. My dad gives me a quick push and I swing higher, higher, higher. My feet touch the sun and my heart sings, I am free. So this it kind of in a way conveys a similar feeling, but it's a free verse format, and you could see how something like this would be much easier for kids, and when they realize that they can like put words where they want to and they don't have to have correct punctuation, you could just see how it would free them to just express themselves without worrying about all those language conventions. Okay. So now I want to share with you another poem. This is actually part of a poem. The rest of it's on the next slide. This is from one of my favorite books. It's called Emma Dilemma, Big Sister Poems. It's written by Christine O'Connell George and illustrated by Nancy Carpenter, and I do have permission from the publisher to share this. But let me read the poem to you first, and you can kind of think about how your kids would respond to this poem and the fact that it's a free verse poem and how it's maybe different from other things. So, snooping. One good thing about a little sister is that if I give her a boost, she can reach that mysterious box hidden on the top shelf. One bad thing about a little sister is that she can't keep secrets. When my secrets are inside Emma, they leak out slowly like air out of a balloon, or fast in one enormous tattletale explosion. Now, I just love that. Like when I read it, to me, I love the metaphors there. Actually, there's a simile and a metaphor right there in the same poem. And I think kids could easily relate to it. Younger kids, it would be a great introduction. This book and others of Christine's would be a great introduction for younger kids too, and older kids. One of my favorite books from Christine is, I think it's the first book that I read of hers. It's called Toasting Marshmallows, and it's camping poems. But it's not one that kids could relate to if they've never been camping, but my family did a lot of camping, and so poem after poem I could really relate to it. So you might want to look and see what she has available in her collection of poetry books as a great place to start. And I will tell you, a lot of school media centers already have her books, and she does do school visits if anybody's interested, and your kids love her stuff, so she's great. So I actually created a freebie based on this book, and the way it came about was I've had a link on my website for a number of years. I have a poetry page of resources on my website, a lot of free resources. And Christine emailed me one day, like out of the blue. I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, my, favorite children's poet author has emailed me. And she said that she had found my website because all this traffic was coming to her website from my website. So she emailed me, and we chatted back and forth, and she had written this book recently, and I got a copy, and I just loved it so much, and I said I would love to create a freebie that I can just put on Teachers Pay Teachers that has like discussion questions, and it kind of digs into like what is a dilemma, and it gets into some poetry and all of that. And she was great with it. She loved it, and so she, you know, kind of had approval on everything, and then got permission from the publisher, because I said we're going to have one of these poems in there. Like, I don't want to do this poetry packet and not have a poem. So that's on the freebies page for you to dig into. I think you'll even, you know, 4th and 5th graders would like it too. Okay, so my whole point of part 2 of this phase of your poetry unit is that on a daily basis, you should be showing and sharing and discussing poems with your students. And have you noticed that I haven't even brought anything up about, you know, analyzing and like, does it have onomatopoeia? And you're like, you don't need to do any of that at first. Just, you know, start off each day with a poem. I would suggest that you show it either with a document camera, or if you have a digital copy, you know, that you can display on your whiteboard or overhead projector, your interactive whiteboard or whatever, because poetry is very visual, so they can see the way the lines are broken up. It's not like paragraphs. And instead of trying to use all this, you know, terminology like, is it a simile, is it a metaphor, just ask these questions and just get discussions going about it. Now, some kids might jump in and say, oh, there's a metaphor, there's a simile, because they've studied it before, and then that's great. You know, you can introduce that. Oh, tell us what you mean by that. And, you know, but I'm just saying, like, a lot of people think they have to teach all those words up front, and it just kind of kills the desire to study poetry. This way, you're building an appreciation for poetry, you know, and connecting to their own lives and things like that before you ever introduce those words. And I said, be sure to include free verse poetry. Do silly poems too, do, you know, rhyming poems, all kinds of poems, but just make sure that you are doing some free verse poetry. Okay, after you've done that, the next stage of the process is to, or step 3, is to compare poetry and prose, and make sure that your students understand what's the difference between them. What is poetry? What is prose? How are they like and different? And, you know, prose has paragraphs. It has, let me just click to show. So this is an example before I go on into details, but in my Exploring Poetry book, I felt like this was an important enough lesson for me to find a sample of prose and a poem, and I actually ended up writing the prose part. I found the poem Fog that was from Carl Sandburg that I've always liked. So I also found an image just from a stock photo site and put that together, and I just wrote a paragraph about fog that's kind of covering the same concept as poetry. And then this was just presented to the kids, you know, which selection is an example of prose, poetry, how are they alike and different. Like, if you're going to talk about how they're alike and different, you need 2 examples, and I would say 2 examples on the same topic. You know how I did the swing? I was trying to compare and contrast. If I had done the swing on traditional and then I'd picked a whole different topic for free verse, I don't think it's as good of a comparison as when you pick the same topic. So here are the 2 again, and in Exploring Poetry, I just did something a little bit different with the Venn diagram. Instead of circles, I did kind of rounded rectangles, and I put all the green circle, and this would be just for you to like put on your whiteboard, is everything that is covered in or is about poetry goes in the green, everything in the blue is prose, and then of course the overlapping area would be both. So here are some things that I came up with, and what I would love for you to do right now is if I miss some things, why don't you put them in the question area, which is really all we have is the chat, and I might go back and add to this later, but as you start working with your students, you'll realize, well, you know, prose and poetry both use a lot of figurative language, and they can both tell a story, but we do have some specific things like stanzas and so on. Now you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, Laura, you know, you said you wouldn't be teaching, you wouldn't have already taught all this wording like stanzas and alliteration, all that. Exactly. So I am saying only put what your students know at this point. Just get stuff down of what they know, and if they suggest things that aren't exactly correct, you could put little question marks next to it and say, hey, why don't we just, I'll put it on here, but I'm going to put a question mark next to it, and as we get into the unit more, we'll decide whether we need to move that around, or, to another location. This is just a really good way to compare the two. You could also do comparing poetry with song, because a lot of kids can relate to poetry when they realize that it's very much like song lyrics. So that would be maybe for another time later in the unit. I would not do that right now, because I think the main thing is the difference between prose and poetry. Okay, so I'm stopping for a second while I'm letting you guys look at this, because I see just a few questions coming up. So someone asked, is this going to be available later to view? The replay of this will be available for 48 hours. But then after that, pretty much the only way to get it will be in the poetry bundle. I'll tell you more about that later, but yeah, it'll be available for a short while after this. Okay, I'm trying to move forward. You know what I find is when I click over to the presenter area, then I cannot forward my slides. Okay, so the next stage is learning the language of poetry. And as I said, someone even commented after the first webinar Wednesday, they always thought you had to do this first. And they really like the idea of not doing this first and waiting until you've, enjoyed poetry together a little bit, so then the kids are ready for it. So these are just commonly used ones, and in the products that I've made, I've kind of used these. I know there are some others. Another thing I just wanted to mention is I am planning to create some task cards to work on these 8 terms, and they will be the ones that have images for Plickers, which I love Plickers now. If, some of you probably saw my Plickers webinars and saw where if you can get task cards that have images, you can upload those instead of having to type in the questions. So I'm going to be working on that early next week. All right, so how do you introduce them? You keep on going with your poetry. You are introducing those terms by sharing poems that use those specific, what we call poetic devices. So if you want to introduce metaphor, you find poems that have metaphors, like this one. I mean, the fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over the harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. It's an extended metaphor comparing fog to a cat. It's not a simile because it doesn't say it's like that. So you could, on the same day that you introduce simile, you could introduce metaphor and find something that uses the word like. But the point is, rather than just getting them to memorize definitions, introduce it through poetry. Maybe add a couple of words a day. I've got, that pack also has word wall cards you could put up, and as you're introducing it, you could put those words up. I have these team cards in there too, where it's like one page. Each team of students you can cut these out. You could laminate them and put them like in a little Ziploc bag for your poetry lessons. But the way you would do this activity would be to spread these words out in the middle of the team, and when you put a poem on the document camera or whatever and you read it and share it, you ask the kids to think of which one of these poetic devices is used in that poem. And then they could reach in and they could pick up the card, or they could touch it, or they could write it on their dry erase board, like this would give them the spelling of it, and then you call on students to share what they think is in the poem. So these are just kind of handy tools. Also, I really feel like it's better to give them kind of a cheat sheet with the definitions on them, as opposed to just making them copy the definitions down, because believe me, your kids will get it. Like if you're using it, you're applying it, you're discussing it, there's really no time that they have to just do a big memorization thing on it. They're going to get it naturally. But it is nice for them to have something like this, and I have a smaller version of this that can go in like in notebooks for the kids. So here's an activity for you that after you have introduced all 8 or the ones you're wanting to introduce, I would do a poetic device hunt with my students. I went to the media center and even the public library, and I gathered up like a bunch of different poetry books, tried to find as many as I could with free verse poetry, and we also had a basal reading text that had poems throughout it, so I would have the kids get their basal reading text out. I always like doing this in partners because it's just more fun, and the kids get more help, like on the spot. If they don't know how to do it, they have a partner that can help them. So together they're looking for examples of poetic devices. So you might have them list on a piece of paper all 8 poetic devices, and then where they find an example, they could write the title of the poem and the page number. You could also use, these are interactive notebook foldables, little flappables that you can cut out and glue down, where they can lift up the flap and then just write the information underneath. So that's kind of all done for you. Another thing to do, remember I said don't just have them memorize these things, have them play games. This is an activity I came up with called Puzzling Poetry. The game board has the words on the left. Those are just permanently on there. And then there's 2 sets of cards. The green ones have the definitions and the pink ones have examples. So it might be like the bee buzzes or something, and then that would be onomatopoeia. And if you notice, the puzzle pieces are made in such a way that they all fit. So they can't just match the shape, but it just kind of makes it fun because they can match them up, and by the end they should have all 8, and then you can check it, or you can have an answer key or whatever. You could glue one down properly done and put it in a folder and let that be an answer key if you wanted to have it in a center. So we are on to the next step of the lesson, step 5, which is getting kids to dig deeper and discuss poetry. Now, the things that I'm going to share with you now, if you were to try to have done this stuff at the beginning of the unit, it would just be a dismal failure. The kids would not be ready. But at this point, they should be ready for the things that I'm going to suggest. So you're going to teach them how to dig into poems through repeated readings. You're going to teach, there's a couple of strategies that I have for collaborative or team discussions, and then I've got a strategy for you for written response. So let's dig into that. Okay, whoops, I think I skipped forward too far. Sorry guys, I got to go back. Okay, so this is a graphic organizer called the Poetry Piece Map that I came up with years ago before I even knew about the term close reading, but it is a close reading strategy because they're going to be reading a poem repeatedly and then filling out the circles about what they, what they get out of it. So they're going to read a poem one time through, like don't even introduce it at all. You need to do this as a class activity, by the way. This would not be appropriate as a center or independent, or it's not something you want to leave for a sub. Like this is an active lesson to be taught to the class at least the first few times you do it. The key to making this work is to find a poem that's a little bit challenging, that the kids can't get the meaning right away the first time through. It's something that they would have to read 2 or 3 times to understand. That means maybe it has challenging vocabulary, it has imagery that maybe they might not catch the first time through. Maybe it's a little longer. I would not do like that little poem I had, The Swing, that I wrote free verse. That would not be appropriate for this. Now the Robert Louis Stevenson one that has rhyme and rhythm and it's like wording that they might not be familiar with, or like if you got those state test prep poetry packets or whatever, those things are really confusing and hard for kids, this would be a great strategy to use for that. So you're going to give everybody the poem. I would give them a written copy of it so they can highlight or mark on it or whatever. You could do it on half a page if you want. You don't say anything. You just say, I want you to read it the first time. What I'm saying, you don't pre-teach vocabulary or anything. What do you think it's talking about? And then they fill in first reading in that block. They just write some notes like, what is it about? And then then when everybody's done, and you're walking around, you're looking to see what they're writing, but you're not helping. Then the next thing you say is, okay, I want you to read it again. Like read it more carefully and really think about what is it meaning. does it mean anything more? Is there a deeper meaning here? Get them to write what they notice. A lot of kids will notice on the second reading, oh, I didn't really understand that, I didn't really get that, or whatever, and they'll write that. And then the third and final reading, if they really feel like they already understand what it means, they can make notes about figurative language or similes, metaphors, personification. They could make like a connection to their own life, how it makes them feel, all that kind of stuff can be in the third reading. And I do have to tell you a funny story about this, and I know if you have gifted students in your class, I know you'll be able to relate to this. So I did this activity with my class, and I went looking for a poem that was kind of sufficiently challenging, and I found one that was in our reading book, which is, a bonus because I didn't have to run it off. I didn't have to print it or anything. So I had them open to a page in the reading book, and I just said, I want you to read this poem and write what you think it means. And so I gave them time to do that. And then I said, same thing, okay, I want you to reread it again, really think about it, see if there's anything you can get out of it that you didn't get the first time. So I started walking around the room. Most of the kids were reading and writing, and then I walked over to one of my students who's a very, very smart boy. He knew he was smart too. And he sat there. He was not doing anything. And I said, I'm not going to say his name, but I called him my name. I mean, I went to him close. I whispered to him. I said, you're not writing anything for the second reading. He said, no, I got it. I got this one. I read it one time and I understand it, and I don't need to read it anymore because I got it. And the funny thing was, I looked at what he wrote for the first reading, and he did not have it. But I said, okay, if you're sure that you have it, that's all right, So it was the first time we did it, so I just was like, he's going to figure this out in a minute, and he did. So we went through the third reading and everything, so then we went over it as a class, and this is why I say you really need to do this as a class repeatedly. Like, you could start off each literacy block for a couple of days with a different poem. It would be really powerful. So anyways, we started going over it, and I asked kids, raise your hand if you'd like to tell me, what you got out of it. Oh, and by the way, I tell the kids when they get to the second reading, I say, don't go back and erase what you put for the first reading if you realize you're wrong. I said, don't do that. Like, I want to see what you thought originally. And it's fine. Like, it's not going to be graded. We want to see how you're learning or whatever. So don't do that, because some kids would erase what they put for their first reading. But anyway, so we started saying, like, what does it mean? And I started calling on different kids, and the poem was confusing. It had some very deep meaning to it that was not obvious. Even me, like, when I read it the first time, I had to read it several times. I was like, oh wow, this is way deeper than I thought. So a bunch of my kids figured it out, and even some of the kids, once again, who normally struggle, really got into the meaning. And I would kind of like peeked over at the boy who said that he got it. I didn't look at him directly, and I never called on him. His mouth was just sort of hanging open. He realized that he did not get the meaning out of that poem. And I never brought it to his attention in any way, but he figured it out. And I'll tell you one thing, the next time we did this, he was reading and rereading and rereading. And the thing that I love about this is, if you have state tests, which we all did and you guys do, the hardest thing in the world is to get your gifted kids to take their time and reread stuff. And it's horrible when it happens on the test because you can't do anything. You have to sit there and watch, and you just want to, you just want to be like, oh no. But if you do this kind of thing before the state test, then they get in the habit of understanding how important it is to reread. So I just think it's a really powerful strategy. So I use this poem. You guys are probably familiar with the poem from Langston Hughes called Dreams, and I use this with fifth graders. I actually thought it was pretty easy, and I was quite shocked at how much trouble they had getting the meaning out of it. And what happened was, where it says, hold fast to dreams, if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. They thought it was about nightmares, and I mean, I just can't even remember all the stuff they came up with, but hardly any of my fifth graders saw it as having anything to do with like hope, like your dreams are like your hope for the future. And yeah, they didn't know what barren field was, and I didn't try to tell them ahead of time, and they figured, a lot of them by rereading it, they kind of figured out what it meant. And most of them actually did. By the third reading, they did figure it out, but on the first reading, not very many of them figured it out. And I'm pretty sure this one is like in the public domain, so that was one reason that I brought it in as an example. But look for something, like I said, that's sufficiently challenging that it's going to take a couple of readings for your kids to get it. So when I was putting together the book Exploring Poetry, this was an activity that I was working on, and I had a group of Facebook teachers that were kind of testing the things with their class and giving me ideas and feedback. And they suggested writing a little place at the bottom for the kids to write a summary. And I thought that was a great idea, because after, you do the 3 readings, you're in a perfect position to summarize what is the poem about. And then somebody said, well, wait a minute, I think they should put the theme. So what I did was I gave 2 variations of that printable, one where they're doing a summary and then one where they do the theme. So, I mean, this is a very simple thing. You can just do like a circle, divide into 3 block, 3 sections, and then you can have them write in a notebook or something, the summary or the theme. But if you like having things ready to go, that's there for you. And then I know as a teacher myself, I liked having things like this 2 to a page, where I could print, like if I had 30 kids, I could print 15 and cut them in half. So that's what I did, and then they can be glued down in a journal for your students. And then at the bottom, you can ask your kids to write whatever you want on that line. It could be a summary, it could be a theme, or it could be examples of imagery, or whatever you wanted to do. Okay, it's time to get into the discussion phase. So notice how I brought in the poetry piece map first, where they're not really discussing it except as a class, but they're learning how to dig in and get meaning out of it. That is super important before you do this next strategy, which is for discussion, but it's not really for writing. It's a discussion strategy. So are any of you familiar with the talking sticks discussion strategy that I've written about on my blog? On the Freebies page, I have a link to that blog article, but I'm going to tell you briefly what it is. It's a very simple strategy, but it's one for equalizing participation. And with the talking stick strategy, you need some kind of discussion cards. Now, these are ones that I'm showing you here are in my Exploring Poetry book, but you could just create them yourself with index cards or whatever, but you've got to have some task card type things where there's like one question on each, because it helps to monitor the flow. So what you do is you have this stack of task cards. Each team of students, like 3 to 4 to no more than 5 students, is sitting together. You put the cards face down, give them to the leader. The leader's going to like rotate each round. The leader flips over a card. And, oh, let me tell you about the sticks. So you have a cup with craft sticks in it, and the leader is going to give each team member 2 craft sticks that they're just going to hold on to. And then the leader holds on to the cup. So they flip over the first card, and maybe it says, what's the title, who wrote it, what's it about? If one of the team members wants to answer that question, they hold up a craft stick. And then say 2 or 3 people want to answer. Well, the team leader gets to hold the cup out towards the person and the person that they're calling on, and the person puts a stick in it, and they answer some of the question, maybe just one part of it, then maybe all of it. If they don't answer the question fully and somebody else, like let's say they don't really say enough about what it's about, then another student might hold up a stick because they want to elaborate a little bit more. So they put the stick in the cup, they tell a bit more. Then when everybody's done talking about that question, then the cup gets passed to the next leader and the stack of cards. And you see the cards are face down, so the kids can't see what the rest of the questions are. And then the next leader flips over the next card, and the process continues. Now, the neat thing about giving the kids 2 sticks is the rule is when you've used up both of your sticks, you can't talk anymore. You have to wait and let other people say something and have their turn talking, and then when all the sticks are gone, then whoever's the leader at that point passes out all of the sticks 2 per person again. So this equalizes participation and keeps one student from dominating the whole discussion, and it makes sure that your students who are like a little less assertive, that they know that they are going to have to say something, because at first the shyest student will end up with 2 sticks, and then everybody's looking at them and they have to come up with 2 answers. So the next time it goes around, they make sure that they jump in and they comment where they want to, and they just don't hold out to the end. And then the kids that want to say something every single time, they kind of zip up their lips and they wait for an important question that they want to talk about. And this is a great strategy for guided reading sessions too. And I used to do that. I'd have the cups in the middle of the team, like with a guided reading group, and then give them out. And it was like me being the leader the whole time. But that way, everybody got a chance to answer things. And then the other thing to tell you is, don't be surprised if you're, after you do this a couple of times, if you're in the middle of some other lesson like science or health or math, and you have the kids talk over something, and somebody comes up to you and says, where are those sticks again? We need the talking sticks. And what that means in a polite way is somebody's doing too much talking. And you know, they know that's a way to equalize participation. So as I said, the details for that are in a blog article. And I actually have discussion prompts. If you're in a Common Core state, I have discussion prompts that are aligned with the Common Core standards for kindergarten through 5th grade that I just went through. Informational text and literature, you know, it's all together for you. That's not in the poetry bundle, but I just thought I would mention it. Okay. The next strategy is called recharge and write about poetry. And this is another one that can be used in many different subject areas. So what you need for this activity, it's a team activity. It could be a partner activity, but I usually did it as a team activity. You need a poem for each kid to have a copy, or a poem in a book. You need a worksheet that, like a printable that has questions on it. The one that's in the pack has 4 questions, but you could make up your own sheet that has 2 or 3 questions, especially with younger kids. 4 questions is too much, as you'll see what's happening here. Or you could spread the activity out. Like if you had 4 questions, you could do 2 one day and then 2 next day. So I'm going to go through the directions and the activity, kind of explain the whole thing so that you would be able to do this. And the little recharger label that you're seeing right there that goes on that can, that's actually a freebie for you. You know, thank you for attending the webinar freebie. That's it's in the Exploring Poetry pack, but it's also on the freebie page that I'm going to tell you about. So here's how the activity works. Let me move forward to the next page. And so these are the directions, and this is just you know, that you could have on the with a overhead, I'm trying to say overhead protector, but probably most people don't have that anymore, like interactive notebook, interactive whiteboard, sorry, document camera is what I was trying to say. You could go through this, or you could just explain it to your students. So you need a cup, like a plastic cup with pencils in it, or if you want to do a can and then wrap this label around it, what it is you're going to call that your recharger. And that in a team of 4 kids, all 4 kids put their pencils in the cup, and that's putting them in the recharger. And the rule is that when the pencils are in the cup, the pencils are getting recharged, and it's happening while the kids are talking about the topic. So while the pencils are in the recharger, they're discussing the question. So the first question might be, what do you think this poem is about? So the leader says, put your pencils in the recharger, and then they're talking about, like, the snooping poem. I think it's about you know, girl who, she saw something up on a top shelf and she wanted to get into it and she couldn't reach it, so she got her, you know, and they're just telling what it's about. And they talk about the whole thing, and then the leader says, is everyone ready to write their answer? And if everybody says yes, then they all pick up their pencils, take them out of the recharger, and they write. But while they're writing, they cannot talk, must be silent. The first time you teach this strategy, you should just be the leader and guide it so the kids get it, because what's going to happen is they're going to break that rule, but they're not trying to misbehave or whatever. They're not used to it. But if the whole classroom is silent, like, and then you're guiding it, it works really well. But with older kids like 4th and 5th grade, after they do it a few times, they can kind of work through it at their own pace. So when everybody's finished with question 1, they are not allowed to go to number 2. That's another thing that you have to monitor. You cannot go to the next one. You put your pencils back in the cup, and then you discuss number 2, and then get your pencils out of the cup. And sometimes the kids will realize partway through that they don't know what to write, so somebody might say, can we put our pencils back in the recharger, because I don't know what to say for this one. I forgot what we said. I don't know what it means. And they put them all back in there and they talk about it. But the main thing is nobody's allowed to copy from somebody's paper. Nobody's allowed to say, what did we say again? Tell me what I'm supposed to write. You hear that kind of thing. This totally stops that, and it makes the kids get more engaged in the conversations, because they know that they're going to be held accountable for it later by having to write their responses. So for questions like this, that would take a whole class period for 4th and 5th graders, really. So you might want to even break it and do like 2 one day and then come back and let them do the next 2 the other day. The other thing you can do is you can have them take it home for homework if they didn't get through all of it. Maybe give them a little bit of time to talk about each one, but if they don't have time to completely write their answers, they could take it home for homework and finish it and bring it in the next day. So anyway, so this strategy is described in Exploring Poetry, but as I said, that label, the recharger label, is a freebie on the free resources page that will be given to you at the end of the webinar. So this is one that you can use. Oh, it's great for math word problems. Awesome for that, and pretty much anything where you need higher level thinking. So this is where I was talking about kind of scaffolding the written response. Like, this gives them support for the kids who feel like they don't have anything to say. And then the final piece would be some kind of independent written reflection. After they've done that, there's some interactive foldables in the book. You could also just assign one of the questions that was on the worksheet and have the kids do a independent response, or there's a lot of different ways, but you do need that independent component. We are down to the last part of the process, and I do realize that our hour is just about up, but I'm going to continue on because this is really important and I don't want to rush through it. And I do understand if you felt like, well, I had an hour and I've got somewhere I need to be. The replay will be there for you, so I totally understand. But this piece is really important, and I just don't want to rush through it. So this is about the writing piece, and as I said, even if you feel like you don't need to teach writing, I think there's some really important reasons why you should. Bringing back that piece from the beginning of the webinar, I really think that kids who write poetry can understand it better, read it, appreciate it when they read written poetry in other forms. So I would really urge you to spend a day or 2 on this if that's all you have. So first thing I want to tell you about is a color poetry lesson. And this is in the poetry bundle just for the month of April. This is actually from a pack that I have that's called the April Activities Pack. Some of you may have purchased that, and if it didn't look like this, you can download it again, and this has been recently updated. But I'm going to tell you how to do it with your kids. You don't have to have these graphic organizers. It's really simple. So you start off with a graphic organizer that looks like this, and you have a circle in the middle, and this would be a whole class lesson. Definitely needs to be a whole class lesson the first time you do it, and then the kids could work on it on their own for their own color poems. So pick a color maybe that you don't think that a lot of kids would write about. I picked brown for the sample poem because I thought a lot of kids probably wouldn't pick that color, and I don't want to take away their ideas. And then you're just brainstorming as a class. What would brown look like? What would it smell like? What would it taste like? And this is where you're getting into imagery and getting kids to kind of be imaginative and think outside of the normal, like, literal ways of thinking. What emotions do you feel when you think of brown? what objects might be brown? And this is kind of a thing where it's really important to honor what the kids write and not sort of say, well, you know, brown, you think brown would taste like that? You know, I know you guys wouldn't do that, but you know, classmates might, and you have to teach them this is a personal thing. We don't put down anybody's ideas. We throw them all on there, and if you want people to allow the kids to elaborate, like, why do you think this feels like brown or whatever, fine. Once you get that, the next thing is, and this is the example, I actually provided this in the packet, so you would have an example to go by, and then you teach the kids to pick the best of these. Like, you're not going to use all of them. Say, like, which ones are the very best, because we want to write a color poem from the very best things. And then I created this color poem for you that is a sample that kind of, it all goes together, because I really, you know, when I create my resources, I'm trying to make it easy on you, and I know that if you have a sample that you can share with your class, or even if it's just for your own use, so you have a better feeling for where that lesson is supposed to end up, I like to provide that for you. So that's in the April activities pack. And like I said, that's in the poetry bundle just for the month of April. If you'd already purchased that bundle, you need to download that again after the webinar, because it's going to be in there just for April and you need to save it somewhere. Okay, the next thing is how to craft similes and metaphors. This is a great lesson to get kids to really dig into and understand imagery. And like I said, having them write it is very powerful. The first thing about creating a simile or metaphor is you need to pick a topic that has a lot of things that you could compare it to. And this is going to be a whole class lesson again, at least the first time you do it, and then after you go through it, you can have the kids do it in partners or do it as a team and do like a collaborative lesson. So here's the model that I provide for you. The topic that I picked was books, and then I brainstormed ideas about the topic. I have to give you a little backstory on this one. When I was working on the product called Crafting Comparison Poems, I had a Facebook group, once again, working with me, and I said, hey, let's write a collaborative poem together right here, like in our Facebook group. And boy, we found out that it was way more challenging than I thought. So I wrote down every step of the way of what we were doing so that you could replicate it with your students. And it turns out there's sort of a sequence that your kids are going to be really frustrated if you don't follow this sequence, I feel like anyway. So first thing is you're brainstorming all this stuff, and you notice it's not necessarily similes or metaphors like topic books. It could be different types of fiction, fun to predict the endings, learn new things. Those aren't similes. But then somebody might put, it's like a good friend, or, you know, that open doors to new worlds. So sometimes you'll find things on there. So that's the first two steps. The next step is to look at your brainstorming example as a class and say which ones would be like the seed of a simile or a metaphor, like which one could we develop out into a simile or metaphor. So I picked some books are long and hard to read, and I started thinking, okay, what are some things that are difficult, they're challenging, maybe they're not long, but they're challenging or difficult, and like I was trying to think of some ideas for that. And whoops. Okay, so I decided it was like a mountain. I like mountain climbing. I love hiking. And so I thought the one about long and hard to read, I think I could compare it to climbing a mountain. So I just put, reading a hard book is like climbing a mountain. Now that's pretty boring, but it is a simile, but it could definitely be improved. So the next step is to revise and edit your writing. So then I went, books can be like mountains towering over me, steep and challenging to climb, but worth the struggle. So if you're modeling this with your students, they see how you get that seed of an idea, then you do a basic simile or metaphor, and then you kind of flesh it out with more vivid imagery and that kind of thing. And so here's a picture that I want to share with you that this is the only place I've shared this publicly, but this is me and my husband. We were so fortunate to be able to take a trip to Alaska a couple years ago, and we were really excited that we were able to see Mount McKinley or Mount Denali. They say that it's only visible like 10% of the time because it just stays shrouded in clouds all the time. Obviously we didn't hike it, but we did a lot of hiking around, and we had a whole day where we could look over and see it behind us. So that was pretty exciting. Okay, so the final thing is to create a comparison poem is you've taught the kids how to do that for one image, do a couple of more images, and then make it into a poem. Or like what Keenan did, I shared at the beginning, this is actually just one long extended metaphor about comparing the sun, you know, to it has a lion's mane and so on. I mean, it's beautiful. Or this is an example from one of my students, Travis. Being that I live in Fayetteville, we're near Fort Bragg, we have a lot of students whose families are in the military, and his, I believe his dad was in the military, so you can see the emotion that comes out in something like this. It's just a bunch of different short but powerful, I guess they're mostly metaphors, because it's war is a game that endangers many lives. War is a twister that takes your parents away. War is a NASCAR race with 1,000 caution flags. War is a raging dog that rips you apart. Wow. Very powerful, a lot of emotion, and you notice he's not using a lot of adjectives. It's just kind of the power of the feeling and the word choice and that kind of thing. So it's pretty powerful and exciting when fifth graders can write that way. And I've seen fourth graders, and I've seen example of, you know, second and third graders, maybe not like with that intensity of emotion this way, but other poems. So this whole lesson is outlined in one of the books in that poetry bundle that I mentioned to you, and there's sort of like a cheat sheet for you to go by that tells what to do and step-by-step directions for the teacher. The book is called Crafting Comparison Poems, and then I went on to extend that in that same book to a partner activity, gave you the directions step by step how you do it as a partner activity, and then I even try to provide like all these little, you know, these little organizing pieces that take so much time for you to do, but I can make it easier for you. So I have the kids list topics that they're interested in writing about. Maybe I list like 10 on the board that I think would be good for a metaphor, a comparison poem, and then I can use that to pair the students up. Using this partner poetry assignment page, and you know, I just pre-write their names on it and then hand it out to them the day that we're going to work on that. And then you can use that same topic list for team poems if you decide you want to do teams of 4. That's a little bit more challenging, but it's good for older kids. Same kind of thing, step-by-step directions, and then this time I have like team assignment sheets to kind of help you out a little bit there. Okay, last piece is on independent writing, giving the kids at least a day or two to write poetry themselves. Now, the first thing, I know it's going to sound really weird, but just trust my 30 years of experience on this one. You're going to have to probably ban rhyme for a week or maybe even for more time. And the reason for that is kids have had so much experience with rhyming poems that when you say it's time to write a poem, what they want to do is start in with rhyme, and they completely lose their voice. They struggle with it. They feel like a failure. It's pretty bad. And I tell you, I try to respect kids' wishes a lot. So the first time I did this, I had like most of the class that was going into the free verse writing, but there was a couple of really big holdouts on rhyme. Oh, please let me rhyme. I know I can do it. I have some great ideas. But they really struggled. And then when I looked at what they wrote, I mean, it was so hard to give positive feedback because it was awful, because they lost their voice and they were just putting rhyming words. And I would say things like, you know, I think you could try that idea and just get rid of the rhyme, and it would be a lot more powerful, and you could use stronger images and, you know, and that kind of thing. So I really, really suggest that you just tell the kids that you're going to ban rhyme in their writing for a while. And the next thing is to have fun with the concept of poetic license. And I have a little freebie I'm going to show you in a minute for that. Make little poetry journals. This is in the book Writing Poetry, where you can fold it in half and then it's got like a pattern for line pages. The little poetry journals are like a half sheet of paper, are just so kind of comforting for the kids to carry with them. Set aside some time for writing poetry and share or publish student poetry. And I'll give a few more details as we go on to that. And I told you I was going to share something with you about poetic license. I'm sure you've heard the term poetic license, but it may be new to your kids. And that is when poets, or even any kind of writer, they break the rules. They change the facts. They change things up in order to create a certain desired effect, and that's called poetic license. And it doesn't have to be just poetry, because sometimes you'll read books and they don't have the proper punctuation. They might make up words and do things, and all of that is kind of wrapped up, and it's called poetic license. And I think that when you teach kids about this, especially in poetry, personally, I would not introduce the idea for stories or essays or anything like that, because you really don't want to go down that road. I don't think in elementary or middle school or whatever, because you want the kids using proper punctuation and all that. But for poetry, it's a perfect opportunity. So one way, after you explain it and you show examples, that the kids might be able to relate to is that it's kind of like the Burger King of writing, because you can have it your way. You get to decide how to spell things, how to do things, what you want to do with that poem. The choices are all up to you, as long as you're doing it for a certain purpose. Okay, so last week, when I was working on this, I kind of thought, wouldn't it be fun to have an actual piece of paper that was the poetic license, that you could put their name on it at the beginning of the writing unit and say, like, you're granted permission to change facts and so on. You notice I put when writing poetry. I did not put it just in general, and then sign it, date it, or whatever, and give it to them. I just think it would be kind of fun for them. However, I have not taught a grade below 4th grade, so second and third grade might be completely confused by it, and some kids might think that you have to actually have this piece of paper. So if you think the concept is going to be confusing to your students, don't use it. But for older grades, I just thought it would be fun. Now, this is one of the things that's really sad to me about not being in the classroom anymore, because I have these ideas and I don't get to see kids doing it. So if you use this in your classroom, I would love for you to take a picture of a student with a poem with the poetic license or something. I don't know, put it on Instagram and hashtag it Laura Candler and let me know, because I would love to see that. I think it would be great. Make sure, of course, you have whatever permissions that you need, but I really love seeing classroom pictures. So I do want to tell you about a resource I highly recommend, and that's a book by Ralph Fletcher called Poetry Matters. It's a great book for definitely for upper elementary. I've never tried to use it with younger kids, and it'd probably be fine for middle. It's written for kids. This is my whole class, like about 10 years ago. I got one copy of it and I started reading it aloud, and they loved it so much they were asking me, like, could we get this and have it for literature circles? Well, I don't really think it's appropriate for literature circles, but I thought that it would be great to have a class set. So I put together a donors choose proposal to get a class set. And I thought, I'm going to email Ralph Fletcher. I'm going to find him and I'm going to let him know that I just love his book so much that I'm trying to get a class set. Maybe he would know who would be able to help get funding or whatever. I just want him to know. So I did let him know, and it was pretty cool, because a couple of days later, the whole project was funded. And when I looked to find out who funded it, it was Ralph Fletcher. It was like a $300 project, and he paid for the whole thing. I was so impressed by that. That was just amazing. So we did our poetry unit, and we wrote poems, and we made a book of poems that we sent back to Ralph. I think it was called Poetry Matters 2 or something like that. But I highly recommend this book, and it's really good just for you as a teacher about how to teach poetry and what's important. This is that same group of kids, you see them holding that book, but When I say provide time for writing, I also kind of mean provide time and space, because it's very hard to write in the classroom where you hear noise and your classmates are all around, you feel like you're all on top of each other. Most classrooms aren't all that big when you have the big kids in there, 4th and 5th grade especially. So I found that if I knew the weather was supposed to be nice the next day, I would get them to bring like a blanket or a towel, and I'd say we're going to go outside and write poetry, and they would just spread out on the grass, and then they would just come up with the most amazing things in that environment. It's really easy to do, but just something about it just kind of sparked their creativity. And then later kids could come back in the classroom and they could still write, but like for the first experience, that was pretty amazing. And look at how these boys, like, they are so into this book. I mean, isn't that like your dream as a teacher, to see a group of boys like reading a poetry book like this and being excited about it? Just amazing. And then set aside time for sharing poetry. If you have like a, author's chair or whatever, we try to include that in some of our end of the day class meetings and that sort of thing. And then the picture on the left, that person in purple over there on the side was me 10 years ago, or whatever years ago it was. I guess it was about 10 years ago, but I love to get the kids to come over on the carpet, sit with me, and we took turns sharing out of their work. It's really important to try to build in some time for sharing in this sort of writer's workshop environment. So my final thought to you as far as the content of this webinar is teaching poetry, teaching kids to love poetry is giving them a precious gift that they can unwrap over and over. It is so important to let these kids have a voice, to teach them that they're important. It kind of empowers them. And yeah, some kids might leave your class and they might not ever write another poem, but there might be kids who go on to write a lot of poetry for a few years. It might help them through difficult things. Maybe their parents are, getting divorced, or maybe they're being bullied, or maybe whatever, but poetry, whether they choose to share it or do it privately, it's a gift that you can give them. And honestly, you watching this webinar and seeing like the method here and adding in your own things that maybe if you've loved teaching poetry in the past, you might be the only person who can give these students this gift. You can't count on somebody else to be able to bring this to them. This is sort of your gift to give them this year before they leave you. And it might make a huge difference in their lives. So, even if writing poetry is not in your curriculum very much, really just a few days I think is so important. Okay, so let me move on to the next thing, where you can find these poetry resources. They are in my TPT store. Laura Candler on tpt.com. I'll put a link in a minute, or I'll have Amy do that. I put a header at the top that has this April is Poetry Month. If you click on that header, it actually goes to all of the resources that were pictured here. And I wanted to share with you too, two examples of feedback on this. And if you do purchase this and it works for you, like, it's so important to share with others like how these things work for you, and it really makes me feel great too. But here's some feedback I wanted to share with you. This unit was the answer to my prayers. Of course, when I told my 5th graders that we were going to be working on a poetry unit, most of them groaned. Now that we're into it, they absolutely love it and look forward to the days when we work on it. They now understand the use of poetry and other figures of speech and use them not only in their writing, but also in their daily speech. This unit also strengthened their reading comprehension of novels where figures of speech are used regularly by authors. Now, that last sentence was really powerful to me, because that, when I said at the beginning of the webinar, like, why should you teach it? That is another really important reason why, is because so much writing does include figures of speech, and when you go through all of this, the kids can use it in their own speaking and then also recognize it in all forms of writing. I'm only going to share one more, but this was another happy teacher. I've been looking for a student-centered unit on poetry. This is definitely a complete set, Everything you need to teach poetry, I really like, and so do my students, your recharge and write concept, both for writing and math, and was very happy to see it included in this set. As always, your materials are wonderful. Now, I can't put the names there because this was just feedback on TPT. If you look on the feedback on that bundle, you know, you'll find it. I'm not making it up, but I don't really know who posted it, but it would be, I always appreciate this kind of feedback. So as I said, I'm going to be giving away this whole bundle, so let me explain some things to you right now. First of all, everything that you read here and that's shown on the left is in the poetry bundle or will be added soon. And as far as the giveaway goes, let's say you're somebody who's already bought it. Maybe you bought it earlier. You know, you bought it last year. You're lucky because you didn't pay the price that it is now, but you're getting all these new things because that's the way bundles work. When somebody adds a product to a bundle, if you purchase it on TPT, you just get all the new stuff. But what I wanted to say about this is that all of these things are included, but the thing that's being added now is the slides to this presentation, and the actual link to this recording is going to be added, you know, sometime later today. I don't have it in there, but I'm going to be adding it later today. Now, the recording will be free for the next 48 hours, but after that, it's not going to be available for free. And I lost my train of thought. If you'd already purchased this, then you would be able to ask me for $30 worth of products from my TPT store. You know, I would just need to see your receipt of purchase or whatever, and then, you know, so if you've already purchased it, that's fine. Like, you can still enter the giveaway and you could win it, but then you would just be asking for other things because you already have this. I also wanted to let you know that some of you might be thinking, well, I already have like exploring poetry, but I really would like to have the webinar recording. You know, you can watch it as many times as you want while it's free, but I'm actually planning to put it as a product on TPT so that people who don't want the whole bundle, if they want to purchase this, you know, because it tells you every single thing you need to know about how to put all of this together and teach a unit. So all of that is more than a $30 value, putting all that together. And the bundle price for it on TPT without a discount is $19.95 right now. When I add the Plickers cards later in the week, that would go up. Right now I have it on 10% off as kind of a thank you bonus for attending the live webinar, and that's going to be, I said till 3 p.m., but it is now 2:24, so I'm going to say I'll leave that on there till 4 o'clock. Because I don't want to push you. Like, I want you to have time to look and see if this is something that meets your needs. But like I said, you know, a lot of this, you don't have to have products. Like, I gave you a lot of strategies, a lot of information, and you can watch the free webinar again. I also want to let you know a school site license might be an option. Maybe you really want to have this stuff, but you don't want to purchase it yourself. See if your administrators would buy a school site license, and then everybody at the school would be able to have access. You could put it on a school server. TPT accepts purchase orders and everything, and the cost of that right now is $99. You know, that might go up, but anyways, that's something to consider as well. So here's how the giveaway is going to work. On the next slide, I'm going to show you the page where the freebies are. On that page is a Google Doc form that you're going to fill out to enter the giveaway. So if you go to this page, and Amy, if you are able to get a link in the chat there, because I don't have a Word document open right now, but even if Amy doesn't put a link, grab a piece of paper and a pencil. It's lauracandler.com/webinars with an S /poetry, no ending. Like, write it down so that even after the webinar's over, you can go back to that page. Because if you click on it now and then after the webinar's over, like, there's not going to be the chat box is not going to be there during the webinar, in the recording. So you can get that down. I will tell you that the Google Doc form is tricky. There's something about, you have to click directly on the name or something like that. There's something weird about the Google Doc form. You might have to play around with it. During the Q&A session, we'll help you get that figured out. But the next page that I'm going to move to is the Q&A. Oops, sorry. I also want to let you know I'm going to be presenting a summer conference, 2-day conference with Pat Calfee, who is an awesome presenter. We've worked together many times. We're so excited. We're going to be doing Virginia Beach, Virginia in July. Pat's going to be doing the literacy toolkit session, 1 day on literacy. I'll be doing the math toolkit session, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to it. So you can find information on that on my trainings page on my website. Okay. Now, for the final slide, so we're going to stay here as long as you guys need me to answer questions. I have not been looking at the question box hardly at all because I had a lot to share, as you could see. So I'm going to stay here and I'm going to start reading the questions, and I will start answering them and helping you guys out. So, and then Amy's here to sort of help with technical issues. So what I would like for you to do, if you have a question that's like a burning question you want me to answer right now, even if you put it in the question box 30 minutes ago, could you put it in there again for me? Because I want to know who's still here with me on the webinar and who, who has a question that they need answered. I might not be able to get to all of them. I do see one question going back through. I see a couple. I'm going to go ahead and start with a few and then I'll look. So one person asked, would you recommend using talking sticks with grade 2s? Absolutely, but I would start with it being like a teacher-directed activity and like a guided math group or a guided reading group or a whole class even. You could just give everybody in the class one stick if you did a whole class. But eventually they might be able to do it in small groups, but definitely can do that with, with an adult. So it's really powerful. And then another person asked, if I were to teach this unit in earnest, I love that, how long would you envision taking it taking? I'm just going to say that this, there's never enough time to teach things the way we want to teach it. So I have a hard time answering that question. I would say, and it also depends a lot on your grade level, like 2nd or 3rd grade, they might not be able to do things as quickly, but maybe their teachers might not do as much of it as older kids. But if you just started out at the beginning by not teaching poetry, but just start sharing poetry at the beginning of a month, let's just say you started at the beginning of April and you were sharing, a poem each day and just talking about what do you think, how do you like this, and then you did like a bio poem activity and that kind of thing, and then you really got serious about the the devices like alliteration and all that, like kind of crunch down teaching piece and working with that, maybe a week or something, but it kind of depends on how much time. But then if you're going to have the kids writing and all that. So what I'm trying to say is I think what you do is you kind of pick and choose and you work it where it can. So you might just kind of integrate it into the rest of your literacy time a little bit at a time. I don't know that you would just stop everything in literacy and just teach this. Okay, let's see what we've got here on other questions. Okay, so the person who's in here who's from San Mateo that says, since you're going to be coming to San Mateo, how about stopping by my classroom? When you fill out the giveaway form, make sure that you identify yourself in the comments and say who you are, and then we'll see. I have a busy schedule with family, but who knows? Okay, let's see, I'm going through. Okay, how do you work this type of learning with struggling readers and writers? I would say doing a lot of the poetry reading aloud, doing the games that I shared with you about puzzling poetry. I'm going to be coming up with plickers, task cards. I would keep a lot of games and things to learn the terms and do a lot of reading aloud and enjoying the poetry together. And believe me, the writing, they'll be able to do it. You will be amazed at what they can do. Okay. Somebody says they're not finding the Google Doc for the giveaway. So I'm going to go back to this page and show you has anybody found it? It's right, I've got this big purple arrow pointing April 9th webinar giveaway link, and click Google Doc form. And then there is something kind of weird about, you have to click, I don't know, it's like not clear where you put your answers until you click on it or something, I don't know, but most people kind of, like last time there was like almost 200 people that did fill it out, so you know, hopefully that worked. Okay, thanks everybody. I did get a lot of feedback saying that it's working. All right, let me see any other questions if they haven't been answered. Okay, I think somebody had asked earlier, would it be a good idea to model this beforehand with the whole class? Yes, like pretty much everything you do in this. I love reading all your comments, and believe me, I'm going to go back through and read all of these again later. So just remember this, if you have anything you want to share with me, you know, this is your opportunity because I'm taking time to read it here. Let me go on through to the last page again. Okay. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to stop the recording because we don't need to keep, you know, recording it. I think I've answered most of the questions, but I'm going to stay here and, you know, see if you guys have any more questions. So for those who are listening to the recording, thanks so much for, you know, joining us virtually, I guess, and I hope that you enjoyed the resources that have been shared here, and I wish you the best of luck with your poetry lessons.